The orbital concilium was a gleaming testament to the best intentions of galactic civilization. Perched in stable orbit at Lagrange point L4 of the Kepler nexus, it boasted sweeping viewports that showcased both the contested territory below and the two massive battle fleets that had been exchanging volleys for nearly 5 centuries. Captain Dylan Fletcher of the Terran Federation leaned against the viewport, not even trying to hide his bemused expression. His reflection in the polished glass showed a rugged face with laugh lines at the corners of his eyes, dark hair cropped in regulation military style, and the slightly rumpled uniform of someone who cared more about results than appearances. 473 years, he mused aloud, his voice carrying more than he'd intended in the pristine chamber. And still no victory. The remark rippled through the assembly like a stone dropped in still water. The Zephyrian delegation, crystalline beings whose translucent bodies refracted light in shifting patterns of emotion, hummed with obvious discomfort. Their ambassador, who had introduced himself simply as Steve, a chosen name meant to ease human diplomatic relations, rotated his upper facets in Fletcher's direction. "The Vraxian aggression requires a measured response," Steve said, his melodic voice tinkling like wind chimes. "We maintain position according to the 7th Protocols of Engagement. Victory is a complex notion." From across the chamber, the Vraxian delegation's chittering rose in volume. The insectoid beings, with their glossy exoskeletons and compound eyes, had carapaces that ranged from deep burgundy to burnished bronze. Their ambassador, who had similarly adopted the human name Bob, which Fletcher found endlessly amusing, raised 2 of his 6 limbs in formal objection. "The Zephyrian occupation of the sacred nexus violates the original charter of the 20 Systems Accord," Bob countered, mandibles clicking precisely. "We maintain our rightful challenge according to the protocols. The situation is evolving." Lieutenant Commander Alex Reeves, Fletcher's second-in-command, stood beside him with a data tablet, recording every exchange. Unlike her captain, Reeves maintained perfect posture, her dark skin contrasting with the crisp white of her uniform collar, her close-cropped hair immaculately maintained. "Evolution at a glacial pace," Fletcher whispered to her, then turned back to the assembled diplomats. "So, let me make sure I understand. For nearly 5 centuries, you've been fighting over this nexus, following these protocols that apparently don't allow either side to actually win." The silence that followed was broken only by the soft whirring of environmental systems. "The protocols preserve civilization," Steve said finally, his crystalline body refracting subtle blues of diplomacy. "Before their implementation, wars destroyed entire species." "And planets," Bob added, antennae twitching. "The protocols ensure conflict remains productive." Fletcher exchanged a glance with Reeves, who raised an eyebrow a precise 1/4 inch, her equivalent of rolling her eyes. "Productive," Fletcher repeated. "Nearly 5 centuries of stalemate is productive." "The situation is delicate," Steve said. "Intricate," Bob countered. "Absurd," Fletcher concluded, pushing away from the viewport. "Look, humanity is new to your galactic community. We've only been spacefarers for a few centuries, and we've had our share of bloody, stupid wars. But even we figured out how to end them eventually." The alien delegations shifted uncomfortably. It was the Vraxian undersecretary who finally spoke, his carapace a thoughtful amber. "That is precisely why the Grand Assembly requested Terran involvement," he said. "Your species has a reputation." Fletcher grinned. "For what? Impatience, recklessness?" "For solving problems," Reeves interjected smoothly, stepping forward, "particularly when traditional approaches have reached an impasse." The chamber fell silent again, but this time with a different quality, expectation rather than discomfort. "The Vraxian Empire would welcome alternative insights," Bob said carefully, each word precisely chosen. The Zephyrian Collective likewise acknowledges the potential value of fresh perspectives, Steve added, his crystalline form shimmering with cautious purples. Fletcher straightened up, suddenly all business. Then, let's be clear. You're asking humans to break your tie? To resolve a conflict that's older than our entire space program? The ambassadors exchanged glances, a remarkable feat considering their vastly different physiologies. Yes, they said in unison. Fletcher's grin widened. Then we accept, Lieutenant Commander Reeves. Let's get to work. Within hours, Fletcher and Reeves had commandeered a conference room adjacent to the main chamber. The walls were covered with holographic displays showing battle statistics, fleet movements, and resource allocations from the centuries-long conflict. It's actually impressive, Reeves said, manipulating data with precise gestures. They've maintained perfect equilibrium for centuries. Every advance by one side is countered by the other. It's like watching a choreographed dance. Or a pool noodle sword fight, Fletcher muttered, studying the tactical displays. Look at these engagement patterns. They're hitting each other with exactly enough force to satisfy the protocols without causing actual damage. Reeves nodded. The seventh protocol specifically requires visible engagement with adversary assets, but doesn't mandate destruction. And look at the positioning. They maintain exactly the same fleet formations year after year. What about the tech? Fletcher asked. Any actual advances in 473 years? That's the other strange thing, Reeves said, pulling up comparative schematics. Both sides have made significant technological advances in their civilian sectors. The Zephyrians with crystal energy manipulation, the Vraxians with organic technology. But their military tech has remained almost static. They're deliberately fighting with outdated weapons, Fletcher concluded, because neither side actually wants a conclusive victory. They're just going through the motions. The door chimed, and a junior diplomatic officer entered. Captain, the technical team has completed the initial analysis of both fleet systems. Fletcher took the offered datapad, eyebrows rising as he scanned it. 2 days. It took our engineers 2 days to reverse engineer systems they've been using for centuries. He shook his head. We need to meet with both admirals, separately. The meetings were illuminating. Admiral Zixith of the Zephyrian fleet was a multifaceted crystal being whose surfaces reflected centuries of military tradition. Admiral Korax of the Vraxians commanded from within an exoskeleton, enhanced with ceremonial markings denoting his 500 years of service. Both told essentially the same story. The war had become an institution unto itself, a ritual that defined their civilizations. Victory wasn't the point. Maintaining the conflict was. It's a prisoner's dilemma, Reeves explained later as they reviewed their findings. Neither side can back down without losing face, but neither can escalate without violating the protocols they've both agreed to follow. Fletcher paced the room, restless energy radiating from him. They've turned war into chess. All formality, no function. He stopped suddenly. What's the actual strategic value of the Kepler Nexus? Reeves pulled up the economic data. Originally, it was the only viable hyperspace junction connecting the Coreward and Rimward territories. But 2 centuries ago, alternative routes were charted through the Perseus Arm. So they're fighting over a gas station on a rerouted highway, Fletcher said incredulously. Do they know this? The data suggests both empires know but can't acknowledge it, Reeves said. Too much cultural investment in the conflict. Fletcher stared at the battle projections for a long moment. There's a way out of this, but they're not going to like it. The next day, Fletcher stood before the combined delegations, projecting a confidence he wasn't entirely sure he felt. After reviewing the situation, we propose invoking Article 47B of the protocols, he announced without preamble. The chamber erupted in surprised chittering and crystalline humming. Article 47B has never been invoked, Steve protested, his crystalline form flickering with alarmed oranges. It's a theoretical provision, Bob added, mandibles working rapidly. A last resort, which is exactly where you are after 473 years. Fletcher countered. Article 47B permits alternative resolution methods when traditional engagement reaches systemic stalemate. Reeves stepped forward, activating a holographic display. Our proposal is simple. 1. Decisive engagement. Equal forces. Under human facilitation. Both sides will commit to accepting the outcome, whatever it may be. And what role would humans play in this decisive engagement? Admiral Korax asked, compound eyes gleaming with suspicion. Observers only, Fletcher assured him. We'll provide a framework, but the battle will be fought by your forces, under your command. This is highly irregular, Admiral Zixith hummed, facets shifting with uncertainty. So is a half-millennium war with no winners, Fletcher replied. The question is simple. Do you want this to end, or don't you? The silence that followed lasted exactly 17 seconds. The Vraxian Empire agrees to the terms, Bob announced, antennae quivering with what might have been anticipation. The Zephyrian Collective likewise accepts, Steve chimed, his crystalline body now pulsing with deep blues of formal agreement. Fletcher nodded, suddenly solemn. Then prepare your fleets. In 48 hours, we make history. The preparations were intense. Fletcher and Reeves worked around the clock, studying both fleets' capabilities and developing the framework for the engagement. They met with ship captains from both sides, asking questions that hadn't been considered in centuries. Why do you always maintain parade formation during combat? Fletcher asked a Zephyrian captain, whose crystalline command chair pulsed with confusion. It is the honored tradition, the captain replied. The protocols specify engagement, not formation, Reeves interjected, highlighting the relevant text. You've added constraints that don't exist. Similar revelations occurred throughout both fleets. The humans didn't provide tactical advice. They simply asked questions that challenged assumptions calcified over centuries. On the day of the engagement, Fletcher and Reeves stood on the observation deck of a neutral monitoring vessel, positioned between the two fleets. Below them, the Kepler Nexus gleamed, oblivious to its role as the catalyst for centuries of conflict. They'll start with the traditional opening, Reeves predicted, watching as the fleets arranged themselves in their ceremonial formations. For about 47 seconds, Fletcher agreed. Then all hell breaks loose. The battle began precisely on schedule. The Zephyrian crystal ships formed their perfect geometric pattern, energy weapons charging in synchronized pulses. The Vraxian organic vessels arranged themselves in their traditional phalanx, bio-armor plates shifting in unison. The first volleys were exchanged according to ritual, predictable, measured, and ultimately meaningless. And then, exactly 47 seconds in, a Zephyrian corvette broke formation. Captain Tzix of the Crystal Resonance had been particularly receptive to Fletcher's questions. His small ship darted beneath the traditional exchange of fire, targeting a Vraxian support vessel with precision strikes that disrupted its sensor arrays. The Vraxians responded almost immediately. Commander Crit of the Chiton Vanguard abandoned the phalanx position, leading a wing of interceptors in a flanking maneuver that no Zephyrian defensive algorithm could have predicted. And we're off, Fletcher murmured, watching as more captains on both sides began abandoning centuries of doctrine in favor of actual tactics. The Zephyrians, with their energy manipulation technology, began using focused beam weapons as jamming devices, disrupting Vraxian communication. The Vraxians countered by deploying their organic technology adaptively, with bio-armor that shifted to absorb and redirect energy. The admirals are losing centralized control, Reeves noted, tracking the command communications. The individual captains are seizing autonomy. That's the point, Fletcher said, unable to keep the satisfaction from his voice. War isn't a chess match. It's chaos. And chaos it was. Ships maneuvered in 3 dimensions, using the gravity wells of the Nexus itself for slingshot attacks. Ambushes were set and sprung. Retreats became feints. Every minute brought new innovations as centuries of suppressed tactical thinking erupted into kinetic reality. After the first hour, both fleets had sustained more actual damage than in the previous decade of ritual combat. After the second hour, the battle lines had become so fluid as to be unrecognizable. By the third hour, both admirals were desperately trying to reassert control over captains who had tasted real command and found it intoxicating. "They're actually fighting," Reeves said, something like awe in her voice. "Really fighting." "And learning," Fletcher added, pointing to a display showing a Vraxian cruiser mimicking a Zephyrian evasive pattern, improving it with a biomechanical twist. "They're adapting to each other in real time." By the fourth hour, the engagement had escalated beyond anything either side had experienced in centuries. Real victories were being won, real losses sustained. The Zephyrians had lost their starboard flank, but penetrated deep into Vraxian territory. The Vraxians had lost their command carrier but surrounded the Zephyrian flagship. And then Fletcher saw the pattern emerging: mutual annihilation. Both sides, freed from their ritual constraints, were pushing toward total victory at any cost. The casualties were mounting exponentially. "It's time," he said to Reeves, who nodded grimly. Fletcher activated the emergency channel. "This is Captain Fletcher invoking the mediation clause of Article 47B. Both fleets will cease fire and withdraw to neutral positions immediately." For a terrible moment, he thought they might ignore him. The battle had awakened something primal in both species, the real drive for victory that had been sublimated beneath centuries of ritual. Then, gradually, the firing ceased, ships disengaged, limping back to their respective sides of the Nexus. "Congratulations," Fletcher transmitted. "You've both just remembered how to actually fight a war. Now let's remember how to end one." The aftermath was somber. Both fleets had sustained more damage and casualties in 5 hours than in the previous century. The observation vessel's medical bay was overwhelmed with wounded from both sides, creating the strange sight of Zephyrian crystal beings and Vraxian insectoids recovering side by side. Fletcher and Reeves convened an emergency session in the Concilium, with both admirals attending remotely from their damaged flagships. "Was this your plan all along?" Admiral Zixith demanded, his crystalline form pulsing with angry reds. "To bring us to mutual destruction." "Quite the opposite," Fletcher replied calmly. "Our plan was to show you what real war looks like, so you'd understand what you've been avoiding, and why." "The protocols were created for a reason," Admiral Korax chittered, his exoskeleton showing battle damage. "To prevent exactly this kind of carnage." "The protocols became an end unto themselves," Reeves countered, displaying the casualty reports. "They didn't prevent war. They institutionalized it, made it permanent." Fletcher stepped forward. "Now we move to Phase 2. We've shown you the stick. Here's the carrot." The holographic display shifted to show economic projections, resource distributions, and territorial maps extending far beyond the Kepler Nexus. "The Nexus was strategically vital 4 centuries ago," Fletcher explained. "Today, it's economically negligible. The real opportunities lie elsewhere." Reeves highlighted specific sectors. The Perseus arm contains 17 systems, with energy signatures perfectly aligned with Zephyrian crystalline technology, exponentially more valuable than the Nexus. She shifted the display. "Meanwhile, the outer spiral contains 23 worlds with biosphere diversity that would revolutionize Vraxian organic tech development." "You've been fighting over a symbolic prize while ignoring real ones," Fletcher concluded. "And here's the kicker. None of these alternatives overlap. You can both have exactly what you need without conflict." The admirals were silent, absorbing the implications. "What do you propose?" Admiral Zixith asked finally, his tone cautious, but his crystalline form showing intrigued blues. "Joint administration of the Kepler Nexus as a research hub," Fletcher said. Symbolic victory for both sides. Meanwhile, each empire expands into the territories that actually matter to their development. And how do we explain 5 centuries of conflict ending in compromise? Admiral Corax demanded. Though his mandibles had stopped their agitated clicking, Reeves smiled. You don't call it compromise. You call it victory. Both sides declare they've achieved their strategic objectives, which, if you define those objectives correctly, will be absolutely true. The negotiations lasted through the night, but compared to 473 years, 18 hours was practically instantaneous. By morning, the framework was in place. The Zephyrian Collective would withdraw its military presence from the Nexus, but maintain a research installation focusing on energy phenomena. The Vraxian Empire would likewise convert its military assets to scientific ones, concentrating on xenobiology. Simultaneously, exploration fleets from both empires would depart for their respective new territories. The energy-rich Perseus systems for the Zephyrians, the biodiverse outer spiral for the Vraxians. Most importantly, both admirals would deliver victory addresses to their civilizations, truthfully claiming to have secured resources critical to their futures. Congratulations, Fletcher told them as the final agreements were being formalized. You've achieved in a day what 5 centuries of ritual combat couldn't deliver. Actual progress. The Zephyrian Collective acknowledges the Terran contribution. Admiral Zixith hummed, his crystalline form now glowing with satisfied purples. The Vraxian Empire likewise recognizes the unconventional wisdom of human mediation. Admiral Corax chittered, his exoskeleton now displaying the bronze hues of contentment. As the admirals departed to implement the agreements, Reeves turned to Fletcher. 5 hours of battle, 18 hours of negotiation. We just ended a 473-year war in less than a day. Fletcher grinned. Wait until they get our bill. 6 months later, Fletcher and Reeves stood once again in the orbital concilium. But the view through the viewport had transformed dramatically. The battle fleets were gone, replaced by research vessels and trading ships. The Nexus itself pulsed with increased activity as joint scientific endeavors flourished. Ambassador Steve's crystalline form shimmered with pleased greens as he presented the latest reports. The Zephyrian energy harvesting operations in the Perseus systems have exceeded projections by 237%. Our civilization has entered a renaissance. The Vraxian biointegration programs in the outer spiral have similarly produced unprecedented advances. Ambassador Bob chittered happily. 17 new medical technologies alone in the first quarter. And the joint research at the Nexus? Fletcher asked, though he already knew the answer from the data Reeves had compiled. Breakthrough-level discoveries in crystal organic hybrid technologies, Steve chimed. Applications that neither of our civilizations could have developed independently, Bob confirmed. Fletcher nodded, satisfied. And the public narrative. Our citizens celebrate our strategic victory, Steve said, his crystalline body refracting smug blues. As do ours, Bob agreed, antennae quivering with amusement. Reeves, ever practical, pulled up her data tablet. The Grand Assembly has requested Terran mediation in 3 additional long-standing conflicts: the Proxima dispute, the Tau Ceti deadlock, and the Sirius confrontation. Fletcher groaned theatrically. Don't these species know how to solve anything themselves? Apparently not, Reeves replied with a rare smile. But I've analyzed these conflicts, and they all share a common element with the Kepler situation. Nobody's asking what they actually want, Fletcher guessed. Precisely. They're all fighting over symbols rather than substance. Fletcher sighed, but his eyes twinkled with the anticipation of new challenges. Fine. Book us a shuttle. But this time, I want hazard pay. As they prepared to depart, Ambassador Steve approached, his crystalline form pulsing with curious yellows. Captain Fletcher, there is one question that has puzzled the Zephyrian analysts. How did you know your approach would succeed? Fletcher paused. We didn't. But humans have learned something over our comparatively short history that your older civilizations seem to have forgotten. And what is that? Bob asked, joining them, mandibles tilted in curiosity. That peace isn't the absence of conflict, Fletcher said. It's the presence of justice. You weren't at peace for 473 years. You were in purgatory, Reeves added. Real peace comes when both sides get what they truly need, not when they settle for endless stalemate. The ambassadors absorbed this in thoughtful silence. The Zephyrian Collective will remember this wisdom, Steve chimed finally. As will the Vraxian Empire, Bob chittered in agreement. As Fletcher and Reeves boarded their shuttle, the captain cast one last glance at the transformed Nexus. You know what the real irony is, he mused. 5 hours of honest warfare accomplished more than 5 centuries of ritualized combat. Because it forced them to confront reality, Reeves said, running pre-flight checks with practiced efficiency. Exactly. Sometimes you need to remind people what they're really fighting for, and against, before they can see the alternatives. The shuttle's engines hummed to life, and Fletcher settled into his seat with a satisfied sigh. Next stop, Proxima. I give us 3 days, tops. You're optimistic, Reeves noted, raising an eyebrow. Fletcher grinned. Always. It's a human thing. The shuttle detached from the Concilium and accelerated away from the Kepler Nexus, leaving behind a conflict resolved and a peace newly born, not from the absence of warfare, but from its honest confrontation and transcendence. In the vastness of space, other ancient conflicts awaited the human touch, not because humans were inherently wiser than the older galactic species, but because they hadn't yet learned to mistake the rituals of civilization for its purpose. And that, as Captain Dylan Fletcher would be the first to admit, made all the difference. The story of how one human ended a 473-year alien war in 5 hours spread throughout the galactic community. Some dismissed it as exaggeration, others as luck. But those who had witnessed it firsthand knew the truth. Sometimes the most intractable problems require nothing more than someone willing to ask why they exist at all. As the human diplomatic shuttle vanished into hyperspace, bound for its next impossible challenge, both the Zephyrian and Vraxian observers watched from their respective vessels. Their civilizations were ancient, their technologies advanced, their histories rich with accomplishment. Yet in the span of a single day, they had learned something new from a comparative newcomer to the galactic stage. Something not about technology or tactics, but about purpose itself. And that, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all. The Zephyrian crystalline flagship pulsed with contemplative blues as it turned toward the Perseus arm, while the Vraxian organic dreadnought's carapace shifted to anticipatory bronze as it oriented toward the outer spiral. For the first time in 473 years, both were moving away from the Kepler Nexus. And for the first time in perhaps even longer, both were moving toward something, rather than merely against each other. The war was over. The peace, the real peace, had begun. Captain Dylan Fletcher would have approved. All too easy, he would have said with that irreverent grin of his. Next problem, please. And somewhere in the great expanse of the galaxy, there was always another problem waiting to be solved. Not with ritual or tradition, but with the simple, revolutionary approach of asking what everyone actually wanted, and finding the path that led there. It wasn't magic. It wasn't even particularly clever. It was just human. And in a galaxy of ancient civilizations, locked in patterns of thought as old as their stars, that made all the difference.